Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we are going to have such a great conversation today, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, just know you'll be able to see it on demand. We will be sending out a link later on today after the webinar that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time today during our webinar you have a question for any of our panelists, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. And we'll hopefully get to as many as we can near the end of today's presentation. Okay, with that, I think we are ready to roll with today's DevOps.com webinar, which is 10 tips for achieving cultural change in DevOps, a panel discussion. Our speakers today, our panelists today, besides myself, we have a star-studded lineup.
Wow.
Yeah, I know, right?
That's a big build.
Wow. Drum roll.
I should have worn my rock star outfit.
Well, maybe it's not too late if you need to go change. Let me get to my slide deck here. Talk amongst yourselves. Here we go. I can't find my slide deck. It's coming up. It's coming up. All right.
I'm advancing my slides, but it's not helping yours, Charlene.
Yeah, it's not helping mine. Okay, here we go. There we go. Yay, today's panelists. We have Jeffrey Keyes, who's Director of Product Marketing at Platora, Jeffrey Martin, who is Director of Product at WhiteSource, and on the phone today is David McKay, who is Developer Advocate at Influx Data. Jeff Keyes and Jeff Martin will be on camera with me. If you guys aren't on there already, I can't see. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
Awesome. All right, great. Well, as always, today's webinar is going to be loosely based on today's ebook. Well, not today's ebook, an ebook that we are producing today, putting out. It's called 10 Tips for Achieving Cultural Change in DevOps. It is a great ebook, and it's a great primer for a lot of organizations that are looking to foment change within their organization to adopt or improve their DevOps processes. So everybody who registered for today's webinar is going to get a link to download the ebook after today's webinar, and it's also going to be available via download at devops.com. So that is what we are loosely basing today's discussion on. But I don't want to kind of give away the 10 tips that we cover in the ebook. So the conversation that I really want to have today is really about DevOps culture and why it's so important. And I think there's definitely a kind of this mystical air, if you will, about DevOps and how organizations that are doing DevOps well are doing DevOps well. And we always hear about the three-legged stool of DevOps, that it's about technologies, tools, and culture or people. And so, it absolutely should be given equal standing, if you will, with organizations that are looking to adopt DevOps. But I think, I just don't think a lot of people quite understand when we say DevOps culture, what we really mean. So Jeff Keyes, maybe you can start today's conversation. Yeah, tell us a little bit what what we're talking about when we say DevOps culture, and then, why is it so important?
Well, I totally agree with that. I'm glad you brought up the people technology process, because culture just feels like such a squishy thing. It's like, well, let me get back to automating my stuff, because that's what DevOps really is. You're like, well, wait a minute. Now that if you've been around at all and you've seen a variety of development organizations, you start to realize that the culture is the main thing. Question that you'd have to ask yourself, for example, on the people technology process side is, well, what percentage of that of those three is technology versus process and culture, and how much is people. One of the research analyst things that came across not that long ago put the process and culture and people communication side at somewhere around 70% of a DevOps transition, and transformation is focused on just culture. I love the Peter Drucker quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's the point. Is if you don't figure out this culture, nothing else matters. It's the starting point. So without it, really nothing else matters. We one quick story. We had a prospect that we were working with on just taking their manual environments and just doing a simple kind of ticketing system around how to schedule their environments as their pre-production environments in their development pipelines. And it was funny that the team that was responsible for managing these environments was sending out these reports saying, hey, look, our environments are not available for about 1/3 of the day that the offshore test teams were trying to utilize them. And so then the question is, well, how the crap if they were sending these reports out weekly, and if management doesn't give a crap that those test environments are not available for 1/3 of the time that these offshore teams are looking to use them, how are they ever going to be successful at going through some kind of DevOps transformation?
And it's really important, I think, in terms of that three-legged stool. Culture is the most important one. Mm-hmm. We've all seen how many people have rolled out a tool, DevOps or not, just any tool, without getting their people on board ahead of time. Or built a process where you don't involve the stakeholders and you're just kind of shoving it down their throats, and naturally they don't like that. Right. Whereas if you start with the culture, everything else follows. If you have a good culture, they'll demand the right mm-hmm. tools, and they will build the correct process, or at least what they think is the correct process. But instead of trying to shove things down their throats and really push it at them, they start pulling, which for adoption is key. I mean, how many people have, I've lost count of the number of people I've seen being like, okay, great, we need to start automating the entire build process. Meanwhile, they don't actually task anybody with it. They just sort of say, okay, we got these tools, go use them.
Right, exactly.
Jenkins is enough, right?
Jenkins is enough.
Built it up.
We're doing DevOps.
And I think that's also what you see with like DevOps in name only, right? Where it's, oh no, we're DevOps. It used to be we're Agile. At the end of the day, you can call yourself that, but if your culture isn't demanding that, if your whole process isn't following that team's desire to truly be DevOps, it's not going to work.
Right. Sort of like when you talk to the dev side of the house and like, we're doing DevOps, and it's like, well, where are the ops guys? Oh, well, they'll get it after we're done, and they spend 2 months on it.
Right.
Thank you.
We're doing DevOps in that we put ops in the name.
Right. And it increased my salary. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, nothing wrong with that. That's a good way to drive culture too. But
absolutely.
David, our disembodied non-video voice on the other side, what are your thoughts when you think about DevOps culture, and how do you go about explaining to your customers exactly what DevOps culture is all about?
For me, a big component of the culture of DevOps is things around trust. You have to have trust across your teams and be able to communicate well and build up the safety harness where it's okay to make mistakes, and really not just preaching that within the organization, but it really being true. The development team being able to move fast, the operations team being able to deploy, trusting each other to do those jobs. I think that's as crucially important to building that culture and really engaging with it.
That's a good point. And one thing that I've always, when I hear about DevOps culture, it amazes me how closely it parallels just having a good working environment in general. I mean, a good working environment that has a boss who's very supportive, who has employees who really want to achieve the company objectives. there's a positive vibe throughout the entire company. That, it's so similar to DevOps culture in general. It's like, they want to do it. They're not being dragged into it kicking and screaming. It's, everybody understands that this is for the benefit of the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I would say that, DevOps from a top-down culture, I haven't really seen that work as much as from the bottom up. It's usually developers and operation teams that want to drive that change in culture. So it's about trust and safety with your peers rather than from from your boss or from some sort of hierarchy.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll just add, trust, right? What that really boils down to is having a common goal and communicating well. And I do think top-down has a place in setting the common goal. Because very, very often, especially when you start involving security, development, ops, and security might not all have the same goal. So it can be hard to develop that organically without aligning those goals. If you're measuring ops on uptime, development on story points, and security on, let's say, vulnerabilities fixed, and you have all these different incentives, there is a role for the top-down management to say, okay, wait a minute, let's align the goals for everybody so that we're all working towards the same end. Because without that, you end up with the culture kind of fracturing and pulling itself apart as people pursue rationally their own goals.
Right. Well, and we sort of did this to ourselves, right? We took ops teams and we said, okay, we're going to compensate you on the fact that you've got downtime at a minimum. Great. And you nail that. What do you want now as an ops team? I don't want anything to change, because anything that changes is going to wreck my world. And then we go comp dev teams for how much crap can you pump through this system? Great. Now, you didn't think there was going to be a problem here? And so the only way to change that, just like you said, Jeff, was we've got to align these goals. And then Dave, like you said, as we align the goals, we've got to build trust in each other that we're doing the right thing. No amount of effort in any area is ever going to make any changes until we fix that core fundamental problem. We've got to be aligned in the fact that it's not about having uptime. It's important. It's not about just pumping crap through the system. It's important. We've got to align the fact that there's a different goal we're here for.
Right. And, a lot of times it aligns with just delivering value. And it sounds almost trite that everybody's job is to deliver value, right? But at the end of the day, what else is development and ops even for if it's not to build value and then deliver it? Right. And of course, those should be part of the same goal.
And Dave, I think you said something really important too, the experimentation kind of mindset, the smaller increments, not, doing the governmental approach of we're doing a broad whole program change and we're doing this all at once, but taking small bites and continual bites out of this apple of making a change, that we can take these increments, fail fast, and that failure isn't a bad thing. Failure just means we closed a door knowing that we're not going to go down that path. We know it doesn't work, or that we can find something that does and then replicate it and take the next step, but getting the feedback loops in place to where we can actually measure that and take progress, and treating that journey as the culture. That's the point.
It's a good way of putting it, right? Culture as the journey you're all on together.
Mm-hmm.
So there's one thing that you did say, Jeff Keyes, and that's the fail fast, and I hear that a lot. And I wonder if if we're all on the same page as far as fail fast, what that means. So maybe you can throw out what you think is fail fast. And B, I wonder if everybody is kind of taking that to heart when we're talking about failing fast. And because I think, as with, everybody here, hopefully everybody's human here, but they're all kind of emotionally invested a lot of times in the work.
I have a disclosure to make. I'm actually an AI.
Too late now. Too late now. But it seems like it's really kind of hard to divorce your feelings when you're talking about failure and how you are perceived to be with your peers and with your coworkers, and it almost seems like that's a difficult thing to accomplish sometimes. What do you think?
So what's fun about the role that I currently have is I get to talk to a lot of customers, but as part of that, I take that feedback from my intuition and things I talk about, and we run experiments from a marketing perspective all the time. We put them on the website. As a marketeer, we call them things like growth hacking, and it's marketing science, if you will. But we run these things all the dang time. We'll take a whole web page and do an A/B test and say, how'd that work? And it's phenomenal, the failures we've experienced. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. That's great. The reason that's great is because I know from a marketing point of view, the messages that are no longer working or that aren't resonating. And knowing that early is fantastic. Why aren't we doing that more with our product before we invest millions in it? Because if you imagine the life cycle of a product from ideation all the way to production, and then to have to, in essence, end of life some kind of concept and transform the data and move it across, the bugs that are created, it's massive. The earlier you can take an experiment and treat your efforts as experiments, isn't that part of the Agile Manifesto? Isn't that part of the whole idea of where we're going? Take smaller chunks, iterate on them, find the ones that work and amplify them. Find the ones that don't and know that they're closed paths for right now for that particular direction. You try making it in the future, but don't make wholesale changes without first running an experiment. There was it's like the if you ever watched that Gold Digger show that they used to put on A&E, and there was a group out there that was hunting for gold, and they would do this massive investment of running things, all their equipment over, and then they would go do all the production trying to find it, and then they had this idea, why don't we test drill a hole and see how well it performs before we go invest all this money? Why don't we're still in software doing these 18-month planning cycles? We do this massive investment. That's not the point. Do smaller, do more incremental.
I'm a product guy, and to me, there's two kinds of failure, right? The ones that you can't learn anything from and the ones you can. There's constructive failures, and there's objectively bad failures. Somebody didn't test a product or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Hey, we went down because we didn't test it. That is not an okay failure.
Right, exactly.
But a lot of the constructive failures come from things like beta programs, which in a lot of companies to this day, they don't treat those as experiments. They treat them as actual launch activities, and like it's the last step in our launch.
Right.
Whereas realistically, no, betas are there to validate the customer need. And especially in something like the role of DevOps, where you can put out a small piece, validate that it met whatever need it was supposed to meet, check with the customers. A failure that you didn't meet that need isn't that bad. It's really not bad. You've learned something.
Right.
As long as you can learn something from the failure, it should be encouraged in the culture. Obviously, failures with a big capital F, and we took the Amazon down for 2 days. Those should be discouraged. But
generally,
right. And same thing. As people get more and more conscious about things like privacy and security, you don't want failures in security. You don't want failures in violating a privacy rule like GDPR stuff. But you completely should get failures in beta processes, features that didn't quite deliver the value you thought they would, or just fundamentally, you should be able to deliver a feature and pull it back, be able to say, okay, whoops, we made a mistake, or this is going to be a problem. We need to undo that without casting blame, just treating it as a learning activity.
Right.
Which is really, really hard for most cultures.
Yeah, and that's my point, is we've all been kind of trained that failure is a bad thing, and failure is not an option. And if you fail, then you're a total loser. So how as a company, how do you move beyond that to say failure is actually a good thing and we should embrace failure because that's how we learn? I mean, it almost seems like a mixed message, especially if you're getting that messaging in other parts of the company, that failure is, not a good thing. So, David, I want to bring you back into the conversation here. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot to unpack there. I heard agility, I heard experimentation, the failure, feedback loops. I mean, they're all spot on and they're great. And then what you've said there about failure, how do you make that safe? Well, I think what companies really need to understand there is that failures are going to happen regardless. And if you don't have a culture there where people feel safe in order to speak up and to collect feedback or to say that isn't going to work or this doesn't work, those failures are going to lay hidden there until something catastrophic happens. And that's why we say fail fast or fail early, because you want people to speak up and say, oh, I don't think this will work, and discover it before you've invested. Like we were saying, government projects are going for years and spend millions. If you can identify and people feel safe to bring that up early through regular feedback loops and through short sprints or whatever kind of methodology you're using, then you're going to identify and catch those early. And if you don't have that culture, the failures will still happen. You just won't find out until it's too late.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of red flags too that pop up, which I know we've got a slide on for later with, the signs of a bad
Don't give
culture.
it away. Don't give it away.
I'm not giving it away. That's a tease. I'm teasing. We have some really cool stuff there.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? I'm actually going to advance the slides here if my computer wants to work for me. And we'll move on because we do have to get to eventually to get to that particular slide. So
I just love this slide.
Yeah. As I was hungry, I was putting together my culture. Culture. What's good culture? Let's have some yogurt. No. So looking at the DevOps cultures, what makes a good culture? What makes a not so good culture? What do you guys see with the companies that you're working with, ones that have done it well? What are some of the maybe the underlying things that they have in common? Just throwing it out there. What do you guys think make a good DevOps culture?
I'll start this one off.
Okay.
To me, it's actually it's almost a little bit obvious to say, but it's a lot of what you see in a good DevOps culture is what you see in a good work culture, period. They have a lot of similarities. Are people happy? It sounds like an unobjective measurement, but there is real science behind whether or not people enjoy their job. If you're on a team that's not functioning well, you don't enjoy your job. If you're on a team that's functioning well, you're more likely to enjoy it. So one of the biggest signs of good culture is the team happy? But that by itself is not enough, because you can be very, very happy and not be productive. Lots of people be very happy playing video games all day. That is not a good sign of a work culture. But are you also showing results? Are you actually delivering the value you need to deliver? And it sounds strange, but to me, those are the two biggest pieces of the culture. And where you end up seeing that really, really show is inside, actually, I would say the process more than the tools. Because again, that three-legged stool, culture pulls everything else with it. And a good culture follows their procedures that they've designed and are happy about it. And those procedures work to deliver value. And they use tools to get there.
Yep.
But Jeff, I can see it on your face. You want to dive in. I can see it.
Listen, I got to tell you, Jeff would do the entire webinar by himself.
I would listen to it.
Jeez. I got nothing after it. No, just kidding.
No.
I think you're spot on. The happy team knows they're doing good things. And that's the point. When nobody wants to do a bad job, frankly. Usually those people don't stay around long. And especially in a company that's doing good things, people that aren't wanting to do good things usually find the way out the door anyways. And it changes the sense. My comment here on good DevOps culture would be more towards the value delivery and product orientation. I find the way to bring these dev ops teams that started off with these completely opposed needs, because and we've comped them, and we've their basis for making money has been focused on how much crap can you deliver opposed to how stable can you keep this. No wonder we've had these problems. We have to change the story, and we have to change it with you and me and everybody, that we're all talking the same story. What is it we're really delivering, and why are we getting paid? Because it ain't about keeping production up. Yeah, it is, but it's not. It ain't about how much crap can we push through the system. It is, but it's not. At the end of the day, there's a customer that we're delivering value for, and we've got to understand what does it mean to deliver value for our customers. there is massive disruption in the world today, like the world's never seen. Software's eating the world. We're part of a transformation that'll be talked about for decades. We're in the, in the information age that is going through such a transition like never been seen before. And yet in this process, we've lost sight of the ultimate goal, that we want to deliver value through software solutions to our customers, and helping each team understand that, and bringing it back to that product that we deliver. That's what's going to unify us. How are we doing for our customer? Who the crap cares if the servers are up, if it's, they can't use it because it's a bad user experience? Or, I mean, we should all give a crap about that very intently. We should all be advocates with our customers. I'm always torn when I talk to teams and they haven't really talked to customers. That's mind-boggling to me.
How much you learn when you actually talk to your customers.
It really is. And they're like, wait, what? So again, as a marketing guy, one of the things I do is I record my customers, and we share it amongst our internal teams. It's like, you should listen to these guys. It's phenomenal what they have to say.
Yeah, we do that every week in products too. It's mind-bogglingly helpful. By the way, I just want to bring in one of the questions we got asked. So Dan actually asked that he has over 600 IT employees, but it's not a software shop. So he wanted to say, like, how do you make the top understand that IT isn't the same as the rest of the company? And I'll paraphrase here. They're delivering value to a customer. The customer just happens to be internal. And there's not really a difference, except you get to actually talk to the internal guys more. At the end of the day, Dan, I think it boils down to the same thing. The top needs to understand that whether we're in IT, building a SaaS solution, building a medical device, at the end of the day, we're in the value delivery business to a customer. And if it's internal, external, that's sort of a detail that almost doesn't matter as much, because the whole culture needs to be focused on delivering that value. And that's really what DevOps is, right? Combining what used to be two different values, developing product and getting it out the door, keeping everything working, into one key value, because by themselves, neither is important enough. So I guess I would just say, if you want to convince the top that IT is, needs to be more DevOps, they need to start with the understanding that IT is a value delivery stream to an internal customer, and it works the same as every other software shop in the world.
And if you need help proving that, just run a little value stream mapping session. You'll get it, which is one other point I would bring up here in good DevOps culture. Measure, measure, measure. And when you get done, show those results and comparative measure, and measure again. You're never going to improve what you don't measure. And that's your foundation. You've got to get the metrics, you've got to see what's happening and promote that.
I'll just jump on top of that. Not only can you not improve it, you can't prove it improved.
Mm-hmm.
That was a horrible sentence.
Prove that it got better. Yeah, I agree.
Actually, it worked pretty well. David, want to bring you in again, and I feel really bad that you're not on camera. I want you to feel like you're part of the conversation more. But when you're thinking about good DevOps culture and you're talking to your customers, what are some of the things that you see that are kind of areas of commonality between them?
Okay, that's a good question. I think companies that really do have an embedded DevOps culture that's working well, one of the key characteristics for me is generally autonomous teams. Teams can make their own decisions and drive their own goals forward. And, like was just said, if they're measuring and can prove that they're making progress. And that's a key skill, a key cornerstone thing that I think teams have to have working right for them. It's just the ability to make a decision on their own without going up 3 tiers of hierarchy, requesting permission to do this or do that. To me, it's a warning sign. So autonomous teams, I think, drive a lot of value and really help people embed that culture within their team and in the broader organization.
Well, that makes sense.
And of course, I was just going to say, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Because and you can't have that level of autonomy without transparency as well. Being able to have a clear process in place that shows what you're working on, how it's going, where you are across all your different teams and stuff like that. So transparency and autonomy kind of go hand in hand and make a big difference.
And I was going to say that autonomy also, you can't have that without that level of trust as well, which is what you had mentioned before. So I think trust is actually a huge element to making sure that that you really do have the buy-in from the C-suite.
Yeah, trust provides a foundation, and if you don't have that foundation there, it's really difficult to adopt any other methodology that's going to help you drive this culture forward. You cannot do experimentation without trust. Right. You can't do experimentation without autonomy. So, all of these things are really linked together, and it's when you get that kind of harmony of three, and even more things that we'll talk about shortly, then that's when the culture really starts to blossom.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, just one more thing on good DevOps cultures, the sign of it. Good DevOps cultures sell themselves. I'll phrase it this way: when I train new employees, or even when I talk to my kids about the future of work, to me, there's another three-legged stool. You have to have some sort of skill, you have to work hard, and then you have to sell people that you have a skill and that you're working hard. And metrics, presenting the results, talking about the failures and what you've learned from those failures, those are all signs that the culture is working correctly, because they want to go out and say, look how great we're doing. Mm-hmm. And so selling yourself is something I look for in the success of any team, but especially in something like DevOps, where you do have a lot of metrics you can use. You do have a lot of value. If they're not out there saying, look how much value we've created and look how well we did at doing that, look at the stuff we've done, then what's the point? Ultimately, that's one of the biggest signs is, are they out there saying, look at what we did?
True that.
Yeah.
True that.
So, Jeff, don't mean to interrupt you, but we do need to move ahead, because we're 32 minutes past the hour. We still have about 2 or 3 more slides to go through, and so I'm going to go ahead and push us forward to the next slide, which is basically signs that culture is not right for DevOps in an organization. And David, I kind of want I'd like you to start the conversation on this one. Along, as we've been talking about signs of a good culture, what are some of the signs that you see within organizations that are not doing that don't have the right type of culture for a DevOps implementation?
Yeah, there are a few key signs based on the companies I've worked with in the past. So, I hate to point out tooling or process is the first one, but when I see companies that don't have continuous integration or continuous delivery, to me, that is a sign of a systemic failure in their trust, their experimentation, their feedback loops, and their autonomy. Right? So that's one of the major warning signs that I always see. And moving on from there is, I love it when I see postmortems inside of a company. So if I don't see a process where failures are actually analyzed and discussed as a team, I think that's a huge red flag as well, that the culture really isn't there that allows people to say, hands up, I made a mistake, let's break it down, understand what went wrong, and how we fix that. And again, as was mentioned in the last question, postmortems revolve around metrics and failure scenarios and, root cause analysis, and all of that boils back down to trust as well. So there's kind of like this vicious loop of things, and if you don't have them in the right order, then there's so many problems that you've got of adopting or embracing a kind of DevOps culture within your teams.
Is that something that you've seen a lot with your customers, David? I mean, that they maybe have all the elements in place, but they're in the wrong order, or that they're missing certain things, and how prevalent is it with the companies that you see?
Sadly, it's quite common. Before I was a developer advocate for Influx Data, I was an SRE, and before I was an SRE, I was a software engineer. Mostly as a consultant, I'd go from company to company, and generally people only call in consultants when there's problems. So it's not exactly the best start when I go into the first day with a company. But what I've seen very commonly was they were in the middle of trying to build out CI pipelines, but in order to build out continuous integration, you have to have your environments that are automated and scriptable. So then they start building out that. But then the developers aren't slowing down or helping with the operations team. There's just not this congruency between what everyone is doing. They're not all aligned. They're not all going the same way. So really making sure that I think bottom to top is the best way to do it, just with developers, operations, and product. And usually the failure scenarios are when it comes from a top-down scenario where they say you have to have, we have to be agile. That was the big thing in the late 90s. And then it was DevOps, and now it's SRE. And all of these things contain a lot of the same key ingredients. It's just the way that you put them together or the way that the teams work. So yeah, continuous integration and delivery. Seeing teams retroactively try to fit that into their infrastructure where it's not supported it yet, where the communication structures aren't there for people to effectively collaborate transparently, and for that autonomy for people to sign off on the work that they're doing on their own, without having to go and ask for permission to spin up an AWS cluster, or without having to go to an operations team and asking for 3 new servers in the data center. None of this is possible if that's the kind of situation that you're working in.
And a lot of those situations, I think, start with culture being the third leg of the stool they put together.
Right.
When you go top down, focus on culture, I think works great. I've seen it work that way.
Same.
Managers who really want to focus on building the culture, but too often you see that top down management go from, guys, we need to adopt this process. We're now CI/CD, and I want 80% automation, versus, or I bought this tool, everybody's using it now. So I think a lot of the signs of the wrong culture is when culture is not in the lead. Culture is the afterthought.
Right.
Yeah, and
well,
I mean,
it's hard to monetize culture, right? That I think that's probably one of the primary arguments is, we could sit and sing Kumbaya all day long, but how's that gonna how are we gonna make any money doing that? So it's a valid argument.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate using sports teams as an analogy, but if everybody's sitting there trying to make their own metrics and more concerned about how many points they score individually in a game and they're never passing, the value of culture becomes immediately apparent.
Yeah. There's some funny signs that I think of. It almost reminds me of that Jeff Farnsworthy joke, the "you might be a redneck" kind of story. You might have bad DevOps culture if on the DevOps project it says done, or if the ops teams talks about the DevOps teams, or you put a check mark because you did DevOps when you implemented Jenkins, and so you're done. I mean, there's a lot of signs of you're not really getting it, that it needs to expand much beyond that. One thing that's a telltale sign from my point of view is celebrations. I love out of the agile practices that you celebrate the wins, and for some reason we don't really do that broadly. And in DevOps teams, I noticed that you do. There's celebrations because the celebration from what happened on the planning side rolls all the way through, and everybody does it. And just a couple of comments about that on doing celebrations. I mean, celebrate the failures, celebrate the successes. They're all interesting stuff. If you're not doing them, I mean, here's the most interesting part. There's not a single person listening right now that can't create and make their own celebrations about things that are going on. You have data. You have experiments that you can run. You have things that you can change culture right now by consistently creating and measuring these things, which will change the culture today.
I mean, it goes right back to what I was saying about selling yourself, right? If the team's not willing to talk about what they're doing, that is a sign of a bad culture.
Right.
If they're trying to hide information, or the worst sign is always blame, right? If you're blaming other people, you're breaking down communication, you're breaking down the trust, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Blame is one of the first things I see when somebody says this went wrong and it's this guy's fault who isn't me.
Right. Right.
No surer way to start a nice spiral where nobody trusts each other.
Right.
Yeah, or either the blame was the guy that left the company last week as well.
Right. He's the easiest.
At least then you don't have to work with the guy. But I'm definitely guilty of that one. Oh, that was somebody else's fault. Yeah, he left. But so somebody asked a question in the chat here. Is CI/CD the sign of a wrong culture or the result of a good one? And is no CI pipeline the sign of a bad culture? I wouldn't say that. I think it's almost irrelevant. That's one process and one tool, a very important and mostly applicable one. But I've certainly worked with companies where a real CI/CD pipeline doesn't make sense for one reason or another.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a symptom of anything.
And frankly, how many pipelines are actually water scrumfall, where you've got a really strong CI pipeline, super, automated processes, and that automates all the way to, the first environment, and then sit while it's going through a hardening phase for the next 3 months on some legacy kind of stuff while operations, quote unquote, takes over. Are we really doing DevOps at that point? The point is we've got to bring all this together. It's not just about CI. I love how CI has changed things, but it's not the end all.
To me, CI is an indicator that the team has the ability to spin up new environments painlessly, quickly, and be able to run tests against that environment. So I would say that not having CI and CD pipelines, not this. CD is great because it shows that you've got the autonomy to deploy whenever the team feels they're ready, right? That's a different situation. The continuous integration for me means they're able to test their system, hopefully at a unit level, an integration level, and a system end-to-end level, all inside of a CI process, which is automated. So to me, not having that is a clear warning sign that they don't have the automation to spin up new environments.
Yeah, fair
enough. I kind of disagree a little bit.
Yeah, there is a difference between continuous build, continuous integration, continuous deployment or delivery. I think that's a good point.
Yep. Other things I've heard, these are actual things I've seen and heard. When will we finish this DevOps project?
Right, yeah. That's a big one.
Can't wait for it to get done so I can get back to my regular work. The most common, no measurement. If you're not measuring what you do, another common problem is, frankly, our dev teams that aren't talking to either side of them. There's super efficient at what they do, super agile, but yet not talking. There's still a PMO organization that's largely disconnected and decoupled, and there's an operations team that they're still handing off to, and somehow we haven't bridged all this. Have we really achieved transparency at that point? We really achieved that autonomy, Dave, that you mentioned? You got to pull people in, you got to find a way to do it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, focusing on the commonality that we all have of delivering value to customers will be the way that you'll do it.
Okay, well, along those lines, let's look at signs of the right culture for DevOps. And Jeff Keyes, I wonder if you've got more to say on the topic.
I do,
I just want to, before I get you started, just want to do a quick time check. We're at 43 minutes past the hour. I'd like to wrap up our conversation by 10 minutes till to give us a couple minutes for audience questions that we haven't already addressed. So just putting it out there. Watch your clock.
I'll go fast.
Okay.
When I first started on the programming world, I was actually pretty young, and I got some advice where it was like, well, how do I know what kind of company I should go write code for? And the advice I got was, well, make sure you go to a software company, not to an IT organization, because the way that development's done is completely different. And now, having worked in and consulting and working with enterprise IT, for as long as I have, I get it. I get it a lot better. In software companies, we've gotten used to the idea that there's product managers and there's product owners that are completely responsible for the product soup to nuts. Not only are they responsible for the product, they're responsible for the factory that delivers it. So there is no problem that doesn't fit in their realm. Who cares about value? The product manager. Something I would suggest is the more product oriented we get, the more that we create these cross-functional teams that have this blend of focus of we got security people, we've got operations people, we've got risk management, release management, we've got project manager resources, environment managers, environment data, and so forth. And you pull all these in from I think in the enterprise, we service the enterprise. Why are there not change advisory board members that are helping push left those requirements into the process? All of this has to be, and the way to achieve that, as soon as we agree that the problem is that we're not aligned on what the goal is, and the goal has to be customer value. As soon as you do that, now you need a cross-functional team. That's the product-oriented team. Have it be driven by a product manager. I don't care what title you call them, but have them also care about the factory just as much as they care about the product they deliver for their customers.
Yeah, and I think that's true whether the product's internal, external,
Yep.
both. At the end of the day, sounds like an advertisement for my job, but
It is.
you need somebody actually who's responsible, because if it's very hard to hold a team accountable as much as it is to hold one person. And
Yeah, in sales they call that the
that's my
one
role.
throat to choke.
Right.
Yeah.
I care deeply about delivering value to my customers because that's my job. My job is to deliver the value. The team that has to do it each has roles to play there, but ultimately they all sort of fold up into the value that I'm end up being very responsible for. So I think your point on product management is 100% accurate. But I've seen autonomous teams, as David was talking about earlier, take that in a lot of cases, especially for smaller products or internal things if you're in an IT shop, where you might not have formal product management, but at some point somebody's the voice of the customer leading that, and they take that responsibility. That can work. I think it's rarer, to be fair. And a lot of that has to do with incentives. But
All right. David,
Dave?
you have anything you want to add to it?
No, I think what's just been said there was pretty spot on.
Okay. All right. Great. Well, I think we have one more slide before we get into the question and answer period. So, yeah, culture tips. So this is your opportunity, gentlemen, to give us what you believe are your top tips, one or two for the right DevOps culture. And just a caveat, then some of these tips may be in that ebook that I mentioned at the top of the hour, and which is really chock full of some good information. So I do recommend that everybody who gets a link to download that ebook, check it out, because I think it's one of our best of the year. So just that's my shameless plug there. So I'll let you guys go now. Jeff Martin, why don't you start us?
Sure. So actually, I'm going to start by answering a question weirdly. So Ray had asked us, where do I start? And that's my biggest tip. Here's where you start. You start by aligning the goals. Everything else will follow. It's kind of good old economics 101. People act like they're incentivized, right? The more you make it clear that the goals are all the same, and the more you can align things like incentives and metrics, a lot of times culture will self-organize, because people, look, nobody in this field is dumb. They act the way they think they should. And if you set their goals, if you set their incentives, it goes right back to what we were talking about at the beginning. This starts with being on the same team with the same value. The same goal, delivering value to the customer. You need to align everybody to that goal, and things start falling out from there. So I don't know if Jeff or David, you would disagree that that's the right way to start.
It is.
Okay, that's good.
No matter what
I was half hoping you were going to be like, no, you're an idiot. But.
Yeah. Well, because otherwise you don't have a common thing to talk about. You don't have anything to discuss. If truly you're on the ops side and the only thing you give a crap about is the fact that your servers are up, right on. You've won. You'll lose the war, but you'll win the battle. Great. Have you really done for the company what you should do? If your only goal as a developer is to make sure you deliver code and it's got X bugs that you can verify, is that really your end goal? You could ship comments for that matter. If you're just looking at number of deployments, I mean, great. You did awesome. I think my biggest tip, wherever you sit and whatever you're doing, is to take a look at running experiments, measuring them from a before and after, and celebrating them, both the successes and the failures. They're both interesting. The things that will happen out of doing that, just that little exercise, is one, you'll get used to doing it, but you'll change the culture with you. People will see it. You'll lead by example. By running experiments and by measuring the results before and after and celebrating them, you'll automatically influence others to go, hey, how am I doing that? Because I'm telling you, if you think about management science, management wants to celebrate what's happening. And most often, they don't know. you need to give them sound bites. You need to give them things that they can point to and say, I know what these teams are doing. It will create transparency automatically. And the only thing that's stopping it is you. I don't care if you're a developer, a product manager, wherever you sit in this process, you have enough that you can produce not just what's being asked of you, but you measure, run your experiments, talk about the things you're working on, and make them small enough but impactful enough that they are bets. You're making bets. And what you'll see is over time, you can start to map, hey, we ran 5 different bets, 4 of them were awesomely successful, 1 was a disaster. That's exciting. And I'm guaranteeing you it will expand both left and right of wherever you're at, as well as up and down the food chain of wherever you're at, and people will want more of the same.
And I think that was a great example with the experiments failing. The only way to never fail is to never do anything.
Right.
Like, right at the end of the day, that's the only way to not fail.
Yeah.
And even then you're just failing slowly and quietly.
Then you failed at living. So,
right.
So,
and David, what's your tip, man?
So obviously I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, and back to my bottom-up kind of approach to building that culture. But I think pair programming is as close to a silver bullet as we're going to get as far as intrinsic motivators for developers and operations teams go. By working in pairs, or even more if you want to try mobbing, on simple development problems, you're immediately collaborating, you're communicating, and you're building transparency and sharing knowledge. And then more importantly, pair programming builds empathy, right? None of us are perfect. We all make mistakes. And when you're working together on that, you kind of co-own those mistakes and you can, work on that together. So I think pair programming is fantastic. And I don't just mean 2 developers sitting working on a coding problem. I mean cross-functional. You can sit down with an operations and you can, work on the new deployment or maybe some sort of, a canary deployment or anything like that, and really build up that confidence and the trust and empathy by working in not just in isolation. I think working in isolation can really cause long-term problems in team dynamics. So pair programming is my number 1 tip.
That is a great tip.
Yep.
I love that. So we're all coming from a slightly different angle, right? And I love the development angle there of pair programming is a technique that's dirt cheap to implement. There's not really any risk to trying it, and it can really lead to some big empathy changes, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are all great tips. All great tips. Now, I do want to move into the Q&A section. We've already answered some of our questions. Thank you, Jeffrey. But we do have a couple left. If you do have a question, please go ahead and it's not too late. You can go ahead and just submit it using the GoToWebinar control panel. If we don't get to your question, I know these guys will be more than happy to help you out offline. So even if you don't think we're going to get to your question, please go ahead and submit it if you if you want to get our input. So Brandon sent in a question that we've talked about it a lot, but I really think it merits just maybe another minute or so. Isn't willingness to fail fast a byproduct of a successful culture?
Mm-hmm.
So what steps do you recommend taking to get to a point where you can have those conversations and build the trust with the team you talked about earlier?
Pick me. Do it yourself.
Yeah, maybe you have some insight.
Do it yourself. Like I said, run the experiments. When people see that you can run 5 experiments and 1 failed, then it was okay. You didn't get fired, blown up, and people didn't, beat you with sticks. Awesome. That's
success
great.
Spreads, right? At the end of the day, success spreads. If you're out there selling yourself, other people will follow that and actually try to do the same. And then you'll build a culture where everybody wants to do that. And then you start working together. So throwing out some experiments and sharing the results, definitely the best way to build trust. 100% accurate.
To extend on that, one of the reasons why I love working where I'm working now is I love value stream management as a solution. Part of the solution is we take and gather all those metrics. We can actually show and prove, did this experiment work or not? It's awesome. Okay. I mean, what better value do you have of showing any other team, hey, what you did over there, it sucks. I can show you 3 other teams that are doing it better over here. You think, we're running these little experiments all the time. Get on board. show what you can do, because I'll make you a rock star with all these metrics I can produce for you. That's what's fun about it.
Okay. All right, so let's move rapidly along to our next question, which is how do you effectively measure progress? And David, I really want to hear from you on this one because you've talked about measuring progress in the past, and so how do you do it effectively, especially in a DevOps environment? Do you have tools? Do you measure tool sets, manual tracking, monitoring tools? How do you do it?
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. So are we talking about measuring the progress of building the culture? Are we talking about measuring the process of experimentation?
It's progress, actually, not process. That was my bad. So how do you effectively measure progress? I do believe we're talking about from a culture perspective. Are there, is there a way to measure progress in a DevOps culture without, I don't know, without it just being like a gut feeling, I guess?
Oh, I don't have any sophisticated answer here, I'm afraid. I'm going to defer that to one of my co-hosts.
So Jeff, I'm going to think this falls right in your wheelhouse of value streams.
It does, and it's funny. So Platora is a value stream management company. That's what we do. Now, that said, if you're going to look for and say, hey, where are we on our DevOps and Agile transformation journey? Well, it's like saying, how red am I? Okay, it's really a hard question to answer. You've got to understand your metrics, your objectives, and we'll help you measure on your progress of that. There's a really well-defined set of practices and methodologies and metrics that you can use around it, and that's what tools like Platora actually do. That's the progress tracking.
Don't you also have to know your company too, though? I mean, everything is going to be objective, right? So it's going to be a different level for each different company.
Correct, and exactly, and what's important to you.
Right.
Your DevOps journey for Boeing is going to be different than your DevOps journey for a widget on a website, and it just depends.
So I mean, the one other thing I would just add there is to progress sort of implies, not explicitly, but it implicitly implies an end. And anytime anybody says we're this close to ending our DevOps journey, that is not a good sentence, right? Yes, there's milestones. Yes, there's signs that you're, getting better, but that shouldn't be mistaken for a process that will have a beginning, middle, and end. There's a beginning and a middle, and it never ends.
Correct.
But then when do you know when the middle is?
I think there are few.
Go ahead, Dave.
All right. Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about the development aspect, there are a few characteristics you can monitor. If you can monitor the cycle time of any new issue, or maybe even how many bugs are in the system, how long they're in the system for, how quickly they're resolved. These are all products of that culture that you're building. And if you can reduce the resolution on your bugs, and you can increase, decrease the lead time to building new features and deploying them and getting them in the hands of your users to provide feedback. Those are all good metrics you can monitor to show progress, but they're not necessarily going to show you how far along you are in your adoption of the culture or fostering of that culture.
Yeah, it's easy to show improvement. It's harder to show how close we are to an end goal when there is no end goal.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times the whole point is that you should be learning, what you can get to. At some point, you get your dev cycle as small as it can go.
Yep. And thank you, Dave, too. All those are the kinds of metrics and things that Platora we produce. It's just funny. As you get used to looking at these metrics, they start helping your delivery cycles, and then you can compare teams and continue down this path.
Awesome. Well, guys, we're a minute to the top of the hour, so I have to close it out. But thank you to everybody who did submit questions. Michael, I know we didn't get to yours, but these guys are going to get a copy of the question, so I know they'll follow up with you offline. So I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions, and I also want to remind everybody that today's event has been recorded. So if you want to listen to it again or you missed any part of it, you will have the opportunity to watch it on demand. We're going to be sending out a link later on today in an email, and that will enable you to get to the webinar on demand. It's also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go there and find it in the webinar section. Just go to devops.com/webinars, and it should be right there in the on-demand section. Gentlemen, thank you very much for such a great presentation today. Always a fun conversation. So thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.